Hello friends, it's Marie here from Nicole Designs. I'm going to be playing with this stamp set from Tonic Studios today. This is their Jolly Marshmallow Snowman. It is full of these fun images. You could build your own hot chocolate cup with all of the fun sugary goodies, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. So I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth paper. I'm going to stamp this out using my stamp platform, and I'm using my black hybrid ink from Nuvo. I love this ink because since it's a hybrid, once it's dry, it will not smear no matter what medium you use it with. You can use it with your watercolors, you can use it with your alcohol inks, and it is going to stay put once it's dry. So this is the ink that I'm using today. I'm going to stamp out all my images with this one. I like to stamp out my images 2 or 3 times in my stamp platform because I want a really nice crisp dark line for my stamps. Once I had this mug all stamped out, I want to do a little bit of coloring on the inside. I wanted this to look like it was full of some foamy, bubbly, hot chocolate or coffee, whatever your preference is. So I'm taking a pencil and I'm lightly sketching a few areas in here where I'm going to kind of build my scene. So I'm making some bubbles, I'm making sort of an open area, and if you sit and study your coffee cup in the morning, I don't know if you do, maybe I do, there's areas that have bubbles and areas where the darker coffee is showing through. So that's kind of what I'm going for today. So I'm putting some bubbles around the sides of the mug. I'm leaving a big space in the middle where darker coffee is going to show through. And I'm going to go ahead and watercolor this one. So once I have all of my lines just lightly sketched on here, I'm going to go ahead and grab my watercolor markers. Now, I don't have the whole collection of the Nouveau Aqua brushes. If you have those would work great with this. I would recommend maybe brushing a little color out onto your glass mat and then picking it up with a wet paintbrush so you can have a little bit more control with these tiny areas in this tiny sketch that I'm doing here. With my markers, I'm just putting on a tiny bit of color around all of those sketched areas that I drew. I don't want a ton of color. The way I like to color is I put my lightest color on first, and once I've got that on spread out, I can build my darker colors on top. It's always easier to put your lighter colors on and build more color. It's not quite as easy to take that color away. So start with your lightest color, put a little bit on. If you need more, you can always go back and add more. Don't be afraid to take your time doing this. It's always a good idea to just take your time. Don't rush it. Coloring, card making, crafting should be something that we love to enjoy anyway. So sit down, enjoy it, have fun, take your time doing your coloring. Once I have all my color on, I'm taking just a water brush, and like I mentioned before, you can use a plain paintbrush, just something that has a little bit of wetness on the bristles. I'm not pushing any water out of my water brush at all. The bristles on the end are just slightly damp, and that is enough to get this color moving. If you're going to use your Aqua brushes with a paintbrush, just go ahead and pick up a little bit of that color with your paintbrush and brush it on. You can go ahead and use some clean water to kind of spread that color out. And after a little bit of practice sitting down playing with those brushes, they're actually really fun to use, and I think you could get some great results. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm using Bristol Smooth cardstock because you get a really great color with that when you're using these watercolor markers. They spread really easy on that paper, and they're just the best that I've found. That paper is the best that I've found to get a really great watercolor scene or image like I'm doing here. So I've got my lightest brown on here. I'm going to come in with some darker brown and start adding some contrast. Another thing that I've been learning as I'm coloring is that you really do want some contrast in your coloring. I love the very light colors. I love a very pastel sort of palette. So for me to add darker colors takes me a little bit out of my comfort zone. But I'm learning that if you add some contrast, it's really going to make your colors pop, even if you're using lighter colors. That contrast between light and dark is going to make your lights look even brighter and your darks look even darker. So don't be afraid to play around with that contrast and add in different colors that are light and dark. So I'm putting some darker brown here in those bubble areas and in that open area on my coffee. Could be coffee, could be hot chocolate. I say coffee because I love my coffee. I drink it every day. I do half calf. I don't know if you guys do that too. I mean, I love my coffee, but sometimes if I do the full caffeine thing, I'm a little bit too jittery and anxious during the day. It just affects me the wrong way. So I usually do decaf or half calf, but I still love my coffee and I drink it every day. So this is my cup of half calf coffee. So once I'm putting my darker brown on here, I'm coming in with even a darker color. And I think this might even be black. And I'm just putting a little bit here and there where there would be darkest shadows. And like I said before, you don't need to use a whole lot of pigment. Just put a little bit on, because once you start spreading this, it's really going to spread and it's really going to blend together and add some really great contrast. So I'm just taking my water brush with a little bit of water, spreading that out. I did leave a little area in that open spot, just plain white. That will look like a highlight, again, adding contrast to your image. And I'm just spreading all of this color out, blending it together. And I do have to say this did take a while just to sit down and color this, but I really think it's worth it. I love the way it turned out, just to have this big open area in this mug that you can color whatever you want to color in there. I'm adding sort of a mid-tone brown now. Since I got all of that darker brown on here, I thought the lighter brown just looked too light. I didn't feel like you could see it enough. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of a mid-tone brown here around the edges, because I want the middles to still be really light, looks like a highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and blend that around all of the darker areas. Now, since I knew I wanted to do this and I was going to get in there around those darker areas, I didn't want it to smear and blend together too much, so I did hit it with a heat tool, make sure everything was dry before going in with this color. And it's completely fine to dry your colors between putting on the next color. It's actually going to give you better layers. It's actually better to let your colors dry in between the layers. I sometimes get a little bit anxious and impatient and don't always do that, but you will get better results if you just let it all dry before adding different layers on. So I have all of my coloring done, but what I'm doing here is adding just a few little dots with my watercolor brush here, and I'm just adding some texture. If you look at your bubbles in your cup, they're all spotty. It's got a lot of texture there, so I wanted to kind of recreate that by putting a lot of little spots and dots around the edges of my cup. I'm leaving the middle just blank. It looks like a pile of foam on the top of my cup there, but I wanted to add some more texture so it didn't look so flat. And that's going to finish the inside of my cup. I know I spent a lot of time here talking about how I colored this, but I wanted you guys to see how really simple this can be if you wanted to go and attempt this yourself. So after I got that all done, I went ahead and I stamped out a ton of these images from this stamp set, colored them the same way on my Bristol Smooth paper with my watercolor brushes, and I cut them all out. These are really easy images to fussy cut. They're really quite easy to get in there with your fussy cutting scissors. And I wanted to just show you, I apologize that this is blurry, I'm trying to get my camera to focus, that you can use those big marshmallow images as cookies. I just kind of stamped some of those cute little images in the middle there and colored them brown so they look like cookies. And I tried to kind of match the coloring from my cup and add some of those dots around the outside, just so I have some you know, everything's coherent, everything matches. I like everything matchy-matchy. I wanted my colors and my coloring just to look like it all coordinates. That's the word I was trying to think of, coordinates. Excuse me. It's early here as I'm doing this voiceover, so I'm still drinking my half-calf coffee and my brain has not woken up yet. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead with my background for my card. I'm using some embossing ink. with just this little star image from the stamp set. I love tiny images in a stamp set because you can use them to build backgrounds, do patterns and designs, so don't overlook these tiny images. You can really use them in some creative ways. I'm just stamping this all over my background. I'm kind of keeping it in the lower corner here because I'm kind of having a design that's coming from the top right corner down to the bottom left corner, giving sort of a diagonal line that your eye will be able to follow through on the card. Once I have that all stamped out, I'm using some of this Nuvo fine detail embossing powder. This is their white, and I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle this on all the areas that I stamped with the embossing ink. Now, embossing ink is a clear ink. It's sticky, so that when you go ahead and you sprinkle on your embossing powder, it will stick to those images. You can then hit it with your heat tool and emboss those images. And I'm using white because I'm going to do some ink blending on the background, and it's going to give me a resist look. So I'm going to go ahead and hit those with my heat tool. I'm going to watch them carefully because you can see that embossing powder melt. Once it's all melted, I'm ready to go ahead and do my background. You can't see it very well, but you can kind of see those little stars in the background. Now it's white on white, so you don't see it very well right now, but like I mentioned, that embossed powder will act as a resist. So I'm using my ink blending tool here from Nouveau, and I'm adding some ink, and you're going to see those stars really start to show up as they pop against that ink that I'm adding on here. I am adding some brown ink because I wanted this to really look like a really cozy card, like you would want to sit down with your cup of hot chocolate and eat some cookies, and that's really what it's reminding me of. So I'm starting with a lighter color of ink. Now when you're doing your ink blending, I like to start off of my paper and slowly blend onto my paper with a circular motion. That really helps get sort of an even ink blended background, and you don't have to push too hard. Like my coloring, I like to do my lightest color first and just build up my colors because it's always easier to put more color on than to take color away. So I'm starting with my lighter color, lightly blending it on, and I'm just going to build up my layers. So after I've got this lighter color on, I will come in with a darker color of brown and put it on the edges. Now, if I'm putting my darker color on the edges and I'm letting it get lighter as it goes up, I'm gonna come out with a sort of a gradient look. It's going from dark to light, and it's gonna blend out into that white cardstock background. So I really had fun doing this ink blending. You can see those embossed stars really start to pop out now as they are resisting that ink. If you really want them to shine after you're done doing your ink blending, take a dry cloth and just rub over them, and that will get rid of any of that ink that's hanging on over those stars, and it's just going to make them pop a little bit whiter. So my background is done. It's really simple, but I thought I wanted all of these images to kind of be the star of the show. So I've gone ahead and I've just arranged them on my background the way I want them. And when I arrange all of these tiny little pieces together, I like to put them where they're supposed to be, leave them there, and just kind of take each piece off one at a time, add my adhesive, and stick it back on. So for my coffee cup, or my hot chocolate cup, whatever you prefer, I am going to pop this up on some foam adhesive. So I'm using some Craft Perfect foam squares. These are great because they come in several different sizes, and I think I'm going to be able to use all 3 sizes on this card today. I used some of those medium size on the back of my coffee cup, and some of those really tiny ones. Those tiny squares are going to be great for these smaller images. And then they do have a large size that I'm going to pop the whole front panel up, but you'll see that at the end. So I'm just kind of pulling each image out and adding my adhesive. I'm using my Nouveau Liquid Deluxe glue, and I'm just kind of pulling them out, adding my adhesive, and then tucking them back in where I want them to go. That way I don't have to completely take all of these little images off my background, and I can kind of still see where I want everything to go. So my arrangement is going to stay the same, even though I'm kind of doing a lot of work with it here. This Nouveau Deluxe glue is really great because it gives you some wiggle time to kind of move your images around before it dries. Once it dries, it's a really strong hold, and I've found that this is the glue that I've been grabbing lately for all of my crafting purposes, for my mini albums, for my cards, my die cuts, anything, you name it. I feel like this glue is just really great. As long as I put the cap on right away, I haven't had any problems with it clogging either. So that is a win in my book, because I hate sitting there trying to get my glue bottle to unclog before I can use it. Anyway, moving on, I'm going to add here this little cookie here. I've got that one on foam adhesive, got my mug on foam adhesive, and that little piece of green candy, that one's on foam adhesive as well. Everything else is glued down with my liquid glue, so I'm just creating some different heights and dimension to my card. I'm just trying to figure out where exactly I want this cookie before I go ahead and stick it down. So that's basically the front of my card. I did go back and add a sentiment later. I just used one of the sentiments from the stamp set and I embossed it with that white embossing powder again. Here I am popping up the front of my card with these large foam adhesive squares, and then I'm just going to peel off the backer and put it onto a craft cardstock card base. And that's going to be the card. Like I mentioned, I added a sentiment, but it was really simple. Just embossed it on a strip of black paper and tucked it in there behind some of my images, and my card is finished. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you a great look at the stamp set and how to use it with some other Nouveau products. If you have any questions, comments, leave them down below. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, share, comment, subscribe, and just do all the things. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.